You could have heard a pin drop when the store manager's voice sliced through the quiet like a blade. I don't care who you think you are. You need to leave my boutique right now, or I'll have security throw you out. The luxury jewelry boutique on Palm Avenue in Sarasota, Florida, known for serving celebrities, socialites, and elite clients, suddenly froze. Every eye turned toward the confrontation unfolding in front of the display housing the coveted Monarch Diamond Collection. Standing calmly yet radiating restrained fury was 42-year-old Alyssa Bennett, a poised black woman in a sharply tailored navy blazer. She didn't flinch. Her hands trembled only slightly, a reaction not of fear, but of the immense effort it took to contain herself. She stood face to face with the boutique's manager, Susan Delacroix, a polished, 38-year-old woman whose posture screamed entitlement. Alyssa's expression didn't change, but her eyes blazed a firestorm of experience, pain, and absolute certainty. Across the boutique, assistants froze. Even the background classical music seemed to lower itself into silence, as if the building itself knew something monumental was unfolding. Susan's cheeks flushed crimson. She snatched her phone from the counter and said with ice in her tone, "I'm calling the police. You look like a thief, and you should be arrested." The words were meant to sting, to humiliate, to force compliance. But Alyssa didn't even blink. Instead, she reached into her purse with smooth, deliberate movements and pulled out her own phone, her fingers now steady, movements calculated like a woman shifting into battle mode. "Go ahead," she said, her voice steady. "Call them. But before they arrive, I'll make my call." It was a moment so rich with tension it could have been a movie scene. But this wasn't fiction. This was real. What Susan didn't know, what no one in that boutique knew, was that this single humiliating moment would mark the beginning of her own professional collapse. Because the woman she had just insulted was the owner. But let's back up. Before we dive deeper into how this story unravels, if you believe people deserve respect regardless of how they look or what car they drive, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and comment with the word respect and the country you're watching from. Because this story, it's more than drama. It's a lesson, one the world needs now more than ever. Alyssa Bennett, 42, wasn't just another customer walking into an upscale boutique. She was the founder and CEO of Radiance Atelier, a luxury jewelry empire valued at nearly $200 million in annual revenue. Her designs had graced red carpets, magazine covers, and royal ceremonies from New York to LA. She owned 51 stores across 13 states. But if you'd seen her outside that Sarasota flagship location, you might have missed it. You'd have seen a woman in a navy blazer and modest black heels stepping out of a 2003 Toyota Corolla, paint faded from years of sun. A car she had bought right after Radiance first turned a profit 2 decades ago, and one she still drove. When reporters asked her why she hadn't upgraded, her response had always been the same. "It's a waste of money. This car still runs. It reminds me where I came from. And that's worth more than any luxury logo on 4 wheels." It was that same grounded philosophy that kept Alyssa making unannounced visits to her boutiques every few weeks. She didn't do it to catch employees off guard. She didn't need to micromanage. She did it because she remembered. She remembered what it felt like to walk into stores and be ignored, judged, profiled. She had built Radiance to be the opposite of that, to be a place where every customer was treated like royalty, not just the ones with designer handbags or familiar last names. "I built this company," she often told her team, "so no one else would ever have to feel the way I did when people looked at me like I didn't belong." And on this particular morning, she had woken up in her modest brick home just outside Sarasota, brewed a cup of black coffee, slipped on her bracelet, the same one her grandmother had given her before passing, and chosen the flagship Radiance location on Palm Avenue for her visit. This boutique was her pride and joy. The Sarasota flagship was where she had personally supervised the custom lighting design, where she had handpicked the wall textures and the positioning of each chandelier. It was the store that pulled in over $2.5 million in revenue every month. Celebrities shopped here. Local elites came here to propose with $300,000 rings. It was supposed to be a sanctuary of elegance and equality. But today, something was about to crack wide open. As Alyssa walked through the glass doors, she took note of everything without saying a word. The gold-accented front desk, the symphonic string music playing softly, and the way the chandeliers sent rainbows across the marble floor. But her sharp eyes had immediately noticed something out of place. One of the center display cases, the one housing the Monarch Diamond Collection, was misaligned, just slightly crooked. She said nothing about it. She didn't need to. This wasn't an inspection. It was an observation. She straightened her blazer, touched her grandmother's bracelet like a talisman, and stepped deeper into the boutique she had built from the ground up. That was when Susan Delacroix noticed her. Susan had the look of someone who had always belonged. Her pearls were real, her accent faintly French, her posture perfected at boarding school. She had grown up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a family where money wasn't new, it was generational. She believed luxury was more than just product, it was a lifestyle, and only a certain kind of person belonged in it. And Susan had made herself the gatekeeper. So when Alyssa Bennett, unannounced, unrecognized, and unapologetically grounded, walked in and headed straight for the Monarch display, Susan's internal alarms went off. She approached, smile polished but too tight, too forced. "Hi there," she said in a tone that dripped with politeness and something colder just underneath. "Are you looking for something special today?" Alyssa returned the smile warmly, still completely unaware of the assumptions being made about her. "Yes," she said. "I'd love to see the Monarch collection." That one sentence changed everything. The Monarch pieces weren't shown to just anyone. They were appointment only. The price tag started at $220,000 and ended around $500,000. These weren't pieces for window shoppers. In Susan's mind, this woman in a budget car and mid-tier heels had no business requesting access to them. Susan's smile faltered barely, but noticeably. "Oh," she said, her voice shifting. "Those are our premium pieces. They start at over $200,000. Alyssa caught the tone, but didn't bite. "I understand," she said gently. "I'd still like to see them." Now Susan was trapped. She couldn't outright say no, not without revealing her bias. But she also didn't want to waste her time on someone she believed couldn't afford it. She tried another tactic. "Do you mind me asking what's the occasion?" she asked sweetly. Alyssa blinked. That was new. "Does it matter?" she asked, her voice still neutral. Reluctantly, Susan unlocked the Monarch case, moving slowly, deliberately. She hovered like a guard protecting a museum artifact, hoping Alyssa would get bored and leave. But Alyssa leaned in closer, examining the diamonds like a seasoned gemologist. Then she said it. "The cut on this center diamond, Colombian origin?" Susan blinked, stunned. How had this woman who she'd written off at first glance known that? Most clients didn't even know diamond cuts, let alone country of origin. And then, Alyssa leaned in and added, "The prong settings on this necklace are slightly uneven. That can be improved. Otherwise, the clarity is flawless." Susan went defensive fast. "Our pieces are crafted by master jewelers," she said stiffly. "I'm sure they are," Alyssa replied with a calm edge. "I'm just particular about quality." Just then, the front door chimed. In walked Mr. and Mrs. Whitford, a white couple in their 60s, longtime clients of the boutique. Susan's entire demeanor transformed. Her eyes lit up. Her voice gained cheer. She turned to Alyssa without even looking at her and said, "Excuse me, I need to help some important customers." And just like that, Alyssa Bennett, the founder, the CEO, the very heart of Radiance Atelier, was left standing alone, next to an open display case worth over $2 million, completely dismissed like an afterthought. But that would be Susan's last mistake. Because the storm had only just begun. The boutique on Palm Avenue had returned to its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. The Whitfords sipped complimentary champagne and admired necklaces draped on velvet cushions. Susan Delacroix beamed like she was hosting royalty. Meanwhile, Alyssa Bennett stood invisible, a woman made of fire and grace, observing the scene she had created being weaponized against her. But before this moment, before the humiliation, the assumptions, and the storm she was about to unleash, there was a journey. And it all began with a sketchbook and a pair of bruised hands in a basement apartment in Savannah, Georgia. Alyssa hadn't grown up with money. Her childhood memories weren't filled with yachts and galas, they were filled with the metallic clink of her grandmother's bracelets, the soft hum of an old sewing machine, and the glow of a single lamp as she taught herself to draw jewelry designs after midnight. Her mother worked double shifts cleaning offices. Her father had left before she could walk. By age 15, Alyssa was already selling hand-strung bracelets at local flea markets. By 19, she was doing custom engagement rings for couples who couldn't afford the mall stores. She wasn't just talented, she had vision. And one day, that vision caught fire. At 26, after saving every dollar she made for nearly a decade, Alyssa opened her first store. It was barely 400 square feet, nestled between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The sign read, Radiance Atelier. No frills. No security guards. Just one woman and a dream crafted in silver, gold, and sweat. The first month, she made $1,114 in revenue. The second month, $891. But she didn't quit. By month 6, she had landed her first major custom order, a wedding set for a local anchorwoman worth $8,000. It was all profit. And instead of upgrading her life, Alyssa did the unthinkable. She bought a 2003 Toyota Corolla, used, for $5,200. And she invested the rest back into her store. That car, the one that Susan would later scoff at, became Alyssa's battle steed. It took her to meetings, trade shows, and stone suppliers. It drove her across the country when she opened her third store in Dallas, Texas. And to this day, it was the car she still drove. People mocked her for it. Even now, reporters asked why she didn't have a Porsche or at least a Tesla. Alyssa's response never changed. This car gets me where I need to go. And every time I see it, I remember where I came from. I remember the sleepless nights, the fear, the risk. I remember building something from nothing. Why would I want to forget that? That Corolla had over 320,000 miles on it, and every one of them was earned. But while her car stayed the same, her empire did not. By the time Alyssa turned 42, Radiance Atelier had grown to 51 stores across 13 states. Her flagship locations in Manhattan, Atlanta, and Los Angeles were revenue powerhouses. Celebrities wore her jewelry on red carpets. Her engagement rings had graced the covers of bridal magazines. She had been featured in Forbes 8 years running under Top 50 Self-Made Women in America. But Alyssa didn't care about magazine covers. She cared about service. That's why she created her now famous ritual, one that very few knew about. Every week, Alyssa woke up before dawn, got dressed in her signature navy blazer, slipped on her grandmother's tarnished silver bracelet, and picked a store at random to visit unannounced. She didn't do this to catch people off guard. She didn't do it to play CEO spy. She did it because she needed to see. Not the numbers. Not the charts. Not the quarterly reports. She needed to see the people. She needed to see the way her customers were treated. She needed to feel the energy of her stores. Were the sales associates smiling from the heart, or only when the cameras were on? Were they offering champagne only to customers in luxury clothes, or to everyone who walked through the door? Because Alyssa remembered all too well what it felt like to walk into a store and feel unwelcome. To be looked up and down. To be followed. To be ignored. To be judged. I built Radiance, she once said to a new store manager, so no one would ever have to feel what I felt when I was 19, standing in a diamond shop, holding cash, and still being told, maybe you'd like something more affordable. But today, at the Palm Avenue boutique, that promise was being broken right in front of her. The woman who had trained herself to keep a calm exterior now stood motionless, heart-pounding not with shame but with fury. She had watched Susan giggle with the Whitfords, offering them imported chocolates and plush chairs while she, the owner, was ignored. And the worst part, she had seen it coming. Alyssa had seen the judgment in Susan's eyes the moment she walked in. She had seen the cold calculation. The same old dance, brown skin, budget car, no appointment, must not be a serious customer. But Susan hadn't just misjudged a customer. She had misjudged a queen. Alyssa's stores weren't meant to be playgrounds for the elite. They were meant to be sanctuaries where a single mom buying her first bracelet and a Hollywood A-lister shopping for a $400,000 necklace were treated with the same warmth. But Susan? Susan had decided that she got to choose who belonged. And in that moment, she had decided that Alyssa Bennett, a self-made millionaire, a job creator, and the very reason that store existed didn't. So, as Alyssa stood alone next to the Monarch Diamond Collection, watching champagne flutes clink and jewelry cases open for someone else, she wasn't just angry. She was disappointed. She was watching a dream, her dream, bend under the weight of someone else's prejudice. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to create a scene. Because Alyssa knew exactly what was coming next. And Susan? She had no idea that the woman she had just dismissed was about to change her life forever. The Monarch Collection wasn't just a jewelry display. It was the heart of the Palm Avenue boutique, a $2 million masterpiece of radiant cut diamonds, antique settings, and flawless craftsmanship. The centerpiece necklace alone was valued at $350,000, a one-of-a-kind design with a rare Colombian diamond that sparkled like starlight. and Alyssa Bennett had designed it herself. So when she leaned forward to inspect the necklace silently, respectfully, there was no hesitation in her gaze. Her eyes didn't just admire. They evaluated, assessed, understood. But Susan Delacroix had already made up her mind. She wasn't dealing with a jewelry expert. In her eyes, she was dealing with a window shopper, or worse, a potential thief. And she was about to prove it. "Hi there," Susan had said earlier, tone far too perky to be sincere. "Are you looking for something special today?" Alyssa, still unaware of the storm brewing beneath that sugary smile, had replied with simple honesty, "Yes. I'd like to see the Monarch collection." The reaction was immediate. Susan's smile faltered. Her posture stiffened. The warmth in her eyes evaporated like dew in the Florida sun. Those pieces weren't meant for everyone. The Monarch collection required pre-screening, private appointments, and unspoken but understood a certain look. And in Susan's mind, Alyssa didn't fit. Susan's voice dropped a notch in tone, just enough to signal condescension. "Oh, those pieces start at $200,000. Alyssa heard the change. She registered the subtext. But she gave Susan the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just being informative. Maybe she was doing her job. "I understand," Alyssa said, her voice calm. "Even. I'd still like to see them." Now Susan was caught. She couldn't refuse outright. That would be too obvious. But she didn't want to indulge what she saw as a waste of time. So she shifted strategies. "May I ask what the occasion is?" she said sweetly, eyes scanning Alyssa's modest heels and the barely worn cuffs of her blazer. Alyssa blinked. What kind of question was that? She'd sold luxury jewelry for over 2 decades, and no one had ever asked her to explain why she wanted to view a piece. "Does it matter?" she asked evenly. Susan didn't answer. Instead, she moved to the display case and reluctantly unlocked it, the key turning like a reluctant admission. She hovered protectively over the case as if guarding the crown jewels from a stranger. Her movements were slow, her hands unnecessarily hesitant. She clearly hoped Alyssa would lose interest and walk away. But Alyssa didn't walk away. She leaned in, closely, intently. Her fingers didn't touch. Her eyes did all the work. A lifetime in design had taught her to read every cut, every flaw, every detail from a single glance. She pointed toward the centerpiece necklace. "The cut on this diamond is exceptional. Colombian origin?" Susan blinked in shock. Most customers didn't even know what Colombian diamond meant, let alone identify it by sight. "How did you I mean?" "Yes," she stammered. But Alyssa wasn't done. "The clarity is flawless," she continued. "But the prong settings could use improvement. The left side is slightly uneven." Susan froze. No one, not even high-paying collectors, ever dared to critique Radiance's craftsmanship, let alone someone who, in her view, didn't belong in the store. "Our pieces are crafted by master jewelers," Susan said coldly. Alyssa, always one to avoid confrontation until necessary, gave a small smile. "I'm sure they are," she said. "I'm just very particular about quality." And that's when it all changed. The boutique's front door chimed with a soft ding. In walked a well-dressed white couple in their 60s, Mr. and Mrs. Whitford. Sarasota aristocracy. The type who didn't carry purses but had personal stylists. Susan's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Excuse me," she said to Alyssa without eye contact, already halfway across the floor. "I need to help these important customers." The words important customers landed like a slap. Not because they were loud, but because they made everything else unspoken suddenly very clear. Alyssa stood, alone, next to the open Monarch case, while Susan practically floated across the boutique toward the Whitfords like a pageant queen greeting judges. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitford," she beamed. "What brings you in today? Looking for something special for your anniversary?" The Whitfords smiled politely. Alyssa stood motionless, soaking in every word. "Sorry for the delay," Susan added, glancing briefly over her shoulder at Alyssa. "We get all kinds wandering in here." That was it. That sentence. That disgusting, dismissive line. Alyssa felt it like a knife. All kinds. She had been called many things in her life: ambitious, brilliant, powerful, but never all kinds. Not in a space she had built. But even now, she didn't react with rage. She stood there, letting the silence do the work. That's when someone else noticed. Ashley Lynn, a 23-year-old sales associate and art student, had been watching the whole thing from behind the counter. She saw the imbalance. She saw the disrespect. And unlike her manager, she still had a moral compass. She approached Alyssa, smiling gently. "Ma'am, can I help you with anything?" But before Alyssa could respond, Susan barked across the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ashley, please organize the back inventory. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a shutdown. Ashley hesitated, glancing at Alyssa. It's fine, dear, Alyssa said softly. I'll wait. And wait she did. 15 minutes. 15 long, humiliating minutes. Alyssa stood by the Monarch case as Susan gushed over champagne, presented diamonds to the Whitfords, and laughed at every comment like they were long-lost friends. The difference in treatment wasn't just obvious. It was painful. Susan offered them plush chairs. She explained the history of each piece. She talked about craftsmanship and heritage like she was giving a TED Talk, all while Alyssa, the woman who designed those very pieces, stood there like furniture. But Alyssa wasn't just standing. She was watching, processing, calculating. And when she had seen enough, she walked quietly over to the Whitfords and Susan. Her voice was still polite, still professional, but there was steel in her spine now. Excuse me, she said. I'm still interested in the Monarch piece. Susan turned, her face tight with irritation. Look, she said, tone sharp now. Those pieces require a serious financial commitment. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in our fashion jewelry section. Alyssa blinked. Fashion jewelry? That section of the store held items under $500 pieces mass-produced for tourists or budget buyers. And Susan had just tried to redirect her there because she had decided without evidence that Alyssa didn't belong among the elite. Alyssa didn't flinch. Her voice remained calm. I'd like to purchase the Monarch necklace. The $350,000 piece. Susan laughed. Not a chuckle. Not a smirk. A full laugh. Like someone had just told the funniest joke of the year. I'm going to need to see proof of funds, she said, smugly. Credit card, bank statement, something that shows you can actually afford this. Alyssa was stunned. Is this standard policy for all customers? She asked. For purchases of this magnitude, yes, Susan lied smoothly. But Alyssa had been watching. She had seen the Whitfords try on $400,000 earrings without anyone checking their finances. She had seen them offered champagne without identification. She had seen trust extended without question. Susan pointed toward the exit. Get out of here. You don't even look like someone who can afford the Monarch piece. Probably here to steal it. The store went silent. Alyssa looked Susan square in the eye. And then she said 5 words that changed everything. I won't get out. That sentence, those words hit the room like a thunderclap. The air grew heavy, tense, frozen. The Whitfords stopped browsing. Ashley froze behind the counter. Kevin Torres, the assistant manager, looked up from the back office with alarm. Even Marcus, the security guard, shifted his stance, ready for something, anything. Susan's fake smile vanished. She realized too late that she had pushed too far. But what she didn't realize was who she had just pushed. Alyssa Bennett wasn't a confused shopper. She was the queen of the entire empire. And she was about to reveal exactly who she was. The 5 words Alyssa Bennett spoke, I won't get out, didn't just echo through the store. They landed like a gavel. And for a moment, time stood still inside the flagship Radiance Atelier boutique on Palm Avenue. Customers paused mid-conversation. Ashley Lynn, the young sales associate, stopped organizing inventory and looked up. Kevin Torres, the assistant manager, stood frozen in the back office doorway, concern etched across his face. Even Marcus, the former Marine-turned-security guard, shifted his weight and narrowed his eyes. Across the store, the Whitfords, still seated with their champagne, looked over with confusion. But none of it mattered more than the look on Susan Delacroix's face. Because for the first time since this entire humiliating scene began, she sensed something was off. Alyssa hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't called names. She had simply refused to leave with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to explain herself. Susan tried to recover, her expression tightening. Excuse me, she snapped, her voice rising just enough to make it clear she wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she had already deemed unworthy. Alyssa didn't blink. You heard me, she said, voice low but powerful. I'm not leaving. What you're doing is discriminatory, unprofessional, and unacceptable. Susan's jaw clenched. I treat everyone according to our store standards, she insisted, folding her arms across her chest. And you don't get to accuse me of anything just because you didn't get what you wanted. Alyssa didn't react immediately. She glanced slowly around the store at the Whitfords lounging in plush chairs, sipping bubbly, being offered a diamond tiara like it was a muffin at a cafe. She looked at Ashley, still standing awkwardly between loyalty and decency. She looked at Kevin, eyes flickering with concern and growing realization. Then she returned her gaze to Susan. Your standard, Alyssa said softly, seems to vary based on skin color. It was like someone had punched the oxygen out of the room. Susan reeled, voice climbing higher in pitch. That is completely inappropriate. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. But Alyssa didn't move, not this time, not in her own store. I'm not going anywhere, she said coolly, until I speak to your manager. I am the manager, Susan shot back, puffing herself up, her cheeks flushed, her voice shaking with fury. And there's no one above me at this location. Something in Alyssa's eyes shifted. She took a slow step forward. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But in that whisper was more power than if she had screamed. Your store. Susan blinked. Yes, she said defiantly. My store. I run this place. I decide who gets served and who doesn't. That was it. That was the moment. Alyssa stood straighter. And for the first time since entering the boutique, she looked exactly like what she was, a self-made mogul, a titan of business, a woman who had built a legacy from nothing but grit, brilliance, and unshakable purpose. And you've decided, she said slowly, that I don't deserve service? Susan pointed a trembling finger. You're causing a disruption. You're probably here to steal something. By now, the boutique had descended into silence. The music continued faintly, but it sounded like it was coming from another world. The other customers had stopped pretending to shop. They were watching now. Phones were being pulled out. Cameras were rolling. Ashley stood frozen behind the counter, hand over her mouth. Even Kevin had stepped forward slightly, ready to intervene. But Susan wasn't finished. She spun toward Kevin. Escort her out, she barked. Kevin blinked. What? Susan's eyes were wild now. Kevin, get her out of here. She's disturbing the peace. And if you won't, then Marcus will. She turned toward the security guard. Marcus, remove this woman. Now. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he looked between Susan and Alyssa, eyes narrowing. Ma'am, he said cautiously, are you sure you want to do that? That's when Susan snapped completely. Her voice cracked through the boutique like a whip. She's a thief. She doesn't belong here. Either get her out or you're both fired. The word fired hung in the air like smoke. Kevin took a half step back. Ashley gasped audibly. Marcus's hand twitched slightly near his belt, but he didn't reach for anything. And Alyssa? Alyssa stood perfectly still, but her rage had turned into something colder. Sharper. Not explosive. Not loud. Deadly focused. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her hands weren't trembling anymore, but they were shaking with purpose. You want to talk about firing people? She asked quietly. Everyone in the store turned toward her, like plants bending toward sunlight. Susan took a step forward. Don't you dare record this. Alyssa looked up, her eyes like ice. I'm not recording, she said. I'm calling someone. Susan scoffed. Who? Your lawyer? Your boyfriend? Alyssa smiled just a little. No, she said. My board of directors. Silence. Actual, suffocating silence. Susan's face twisted in confusion. You're what? Alyssa tapped a number on her phone. Her voice changed completely. It was no longer the polite, humiliated woman who'd walked in. It was now crisp, professional, authoritative. Sarah? It's Alyssa Bennett. Emergency board meeting. Now. Ashley's mouth dropped open. Across the store, Kevin suddenly looked like he'd seen a ghost. The name Alyssa Bennett clicked into place like the final piece of a shattered puzzle. That wasn't just any customer. That wasn't just a woman looking at jewelry. That was the founder, the CEO, the woman who owned Radiance Atelier. Ashley, now shaking, frantically pulled out her phone. She tapped into the employee portal and pulled up the latest company newsletter. And there she was, Alyssa Bennett, smiling, standing in front of the Manhattan store under the bold headline, CEO Spotlight, building a legacy of inclusion, one store at a time. Ashley nearly dropped her phone. Kevin stepped forward. Susan. I think you should. Don't say a word, Susan snapped. But it was too late. The truth was out. Alyssa was still on the phone, pacing slowly. Yes, the Sarasota flagship. We have a major issue. Yes, I'll hold while you get the others on the line. She turned and looked directly at Susan. And now, for the first time in her entire life, Susan Delacroix was speechless. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her face had gone pale. Her posture had wilted. And then Alyssa ended her call, sliding the phone into her purse with surgical precision. She stepped forward and calmly asked, Susan, what do you know about Radiance Atelier's founding principles? Susan opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Alyssa reached into her purse one last time. She pulled out a matte black business card and held it between two fingers. It shimmered under the boutique lighting like obsidian. Alyssa Bennett, founder and chief executive officer, Radiance Atelier Incorporated. Susan's knees buckled. This isn't you can't, she stuttered. Can't be what? Alyssa asked. Can't be successful? Can't be wealthy? Can't own the store you just claimed was yours? Susan tried to speak. Her lips trembled. Her hands shook. But there was nothing left to say. She had just humiliated the woman who had signed her paychecks for 8 months. She had profiled, insulted, and attempted to eject the one person who had created everything around her. And now, she had done it in front of customers, cameras, and employees, all of whom were still watching. Susan collapsed onto the nearest stool, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know. Alyssa's voice remained steady. You meant every word, she said. You meant every assumption, every microaggression, every dismissal. And as Susan sat there, makeup smudged, hands trembling, surrounded by luxury and humiliation, Alyssa looked around at the employees she had trusted. And she knew exactly what to do next. The boutique was dead silent. The only sounds were the faint classical music drifting from the speakers and the quiet sobs of Susan Delacroix, the manager who had just insulted her company's founder in front of a full store. Alyssa Bennett stood motionless in the center of the room, her phone still warm from the call to her board of directors. Her voice had not risen once. She hadn't yelled, hadn't cursed, hadn't made a scene. She didn't need to. The weight of her authority and the truth was louder than any shouting could ever be. Susan sat slumped on the edge of a display platform, her face pale, lips parted in disbelief. Her hands trembled, gripping the stool as if it might stop the entire world from spinning out from under her. Alyssa turned to face her employees, her gaze sharp and calm. Every movement was deliberate, measured, presidential. Ashley Lynn stood behind the counter with her phone pressed to her chest, visibly shaking. Kevin Torres, the assistant manager, looked like he'd seen a ghost. And Marcus Shaw, the security guard and former Marine, now stood upright, shoulders squared like he was back on the tarmac in Kandahar. Ma'am, Marcus said quietly, voice respectful, do you need me to remove her now? Alyssa shook her head slowly. No, Marcus. Not yet. She turned back to Susan. Who are you calling? Susan asked weakly, her voice cracking. Alyssa's expression didn't waver. I told you, she said evenly. My board of directors. The people who make decisions about this store. About who stays and who doesn't. That was when it hit Susan like a freight train. All the scattered clues her pride had ignored came crashing down at once. The confidence, the knowledge of diamonds, the way Alyssa had evaluated the Monarch collection like a master jeweler, not a casual browser. The composure. The phone call. The name. Alyssa Bennett. The name on every company memo. The signature at the bottom of her direct deposit statements. The face she'd seen in monthly newsletters but never really paid attention to because deep down, she never imagined a woman like that could be the one in charge. Across the store, Ashley gasped so loudly it drew stares. She had just pulled up the employee newsletter again, holding her phone up to Kevin. There it was. CEO Spotlight. Alyssa Bennett, building dreams, one store at a time. The photo showed Alyssa smiling in front of the New York flagship store, arms crossed confidently. That same navy blazer. That same bracelet on her wrist. Kevin stared at the image. Then at Alyssa. Then back to the image. The color drained from his face. Alyssa's voice was steady, cold as glass. Yes, I'm at the Sarasota flagship, she said into the phone. We have a serious issue. She paced slightly, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. There's been a complete violation of company policy, she continued. Discrimination, harassment, and a total abandonment of our core values. I need everyone on the line now. No, it can't wait until Monday. Susan was still sitting there, lips moving, trying to piece together a reality that no longer made sense. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know who you were. Alyssa's eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed calm. Would it have changed how you treated me? Susan looked down. Her silence said everything. All around the store, phones were still recording. Customers had become accidental witnesses to something much more powerful than a jewelry shopping experience. They were watching a reckoning unfold in real time. Even the Whitfords, who had been treated like royalty just minutes ago, were no longer smiling. They stood awkwardly near the counter, avoiding eye contact with everyone, clearly embarrassed to have been part of this ugly display of favoritism. Alyssa turned away from Susan and addressed each employee directly. Her words were deliberate, public. She wanted everyone, customers, employees, the internet, to hear the truth. Kevin, she said, looking the assistant manager square in the eyes. You tried to step in. You recognized something was wrong. You attempted to prevent it from escalating. Kevin swallowed hard and nodded once, too stunned to speak. Ashley, Alyssa continued, turning to the young sales associate. You showed kindness when no one else did. You offered help to someone who was being ignored and disrespected. That's the spirit this company was founded on. Ashley's eyes filled with tears, relief, pride, shock all mingling together. Marcus, Alyssa said, now addressing the tall security guard. You questioned an order that didn't feel right. You exercised judgment instead of blind obedience. And that takes character. Marcus straightened his spine, eyes forward, lips pressed in silent acknowledgement. Then Alyssa turned back to Susan. And you, she said quietly, you violated every principle this company stands for. Susan broke completely. Her perfect image, the hair, the pearls, the tailored blouse was unraveling. Mascara ran down her cheeks. I didn't mean to, I was just, she stammered. Alyssa didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence was more powerful than any outburst. You meant it, she said. You meant every look, every assumption, every judgment you made the second I walked in. Susan sobbed harder. I didn't recognize you. That's the point, Alyssa said. You didn't even think to consider who I was. You looked at me and decided I didn't belong. The boutique was dead quiet again. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft click of Alyssa's heels as she walked to the center of the store and stopped directly in front of the Monarch collection. She looked at the slightly crooked display case still misaligned from earlier, and with both hands, she gently repositioned it, straightening it, realigning what had been off since the moment she walked in. A symbol, order, restored. Then she turned around, walked back to Susan, and delivered her sentence with the calm finality of a judge. Clear out your desk, she said. You no longer work here. Susan crumbled, hands shaking as she dropped onto the chair. Please. I have a mortgage. Kids. I was trying to protect the brand. Alyssa looked at her, eyes hard. You were trying to protect your ego, not the brand, and definitely not our customers. Susan sobbed again, mascara now streaking her jawline. I can change, she whispered. Please, don't do this. Alyssa gave her a long look, and for a brief moment, there was something almost like compassion in her expression. But it didn't last. You had your chance, she said. You chose not to take it. The security cameras had captured everything. The footage was already uploading to the cloud. There would be no escaping the truth. Alyssa turned back to her employees. Kevin, she said. Effective immediately, you're now the store manager. Kevin blinked. Me. Yes, you. He nodded, stunned, his lips parting but no words coming out. Ashley, Alyssa continued, you're being promoted to assistant manager. Your kindness didn't go unnoticed. Ashley covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide, tears rolling freely down her cheeks, but this time, they were tears of joy. Marcus, Alyssa said finally, you'll receive a commendation for professionalism and a raise starting today. The tall security guard saluted instinctively, then smiled. Customers, many still recording, looked around at each other as if they had just witnessed something historic. Because they had. What started as an everyday shopping trip had become a lesson in leadership, dignity, and justice. And as Susan gathered her belongings in a small cardboard box, she finally looked up at Alyssa one last time. I really am sorry, she said, voice barely a whisper. You built something beautiful. I wasn't worthy of it. Alyssa gave her one final glance. No, she said. You weren't. And Susan Delacroix walked out of Radiance Atelier's Sarasota flagship store for the very last time, carrying a box of regrets and a career destroyed by her own prejudice. The heavy glass door of the Sarasota flagship boutique swung shut behind Susan Delacroix, the click of its latch echoing like a closing chapter. Her heels tapped weakly against the pavement as she walked away with a cardboard box in her arms, everything she thought she had built now reduced to a footnote. Inside, a new energy filled the boutique. It wasn't loud. It wasn't celebratory. It was something deeper, something more lasting. Respect. For the first time since she had entered as an ordinary customer, Alyssa Bennett stood fully revealed, not as a nameless black woman dismissed by a store manager, but as the founder, owner, and CEO of Radiance Atelier. The woman whose name was etched on every paycheck, whose vision shaped every storefront, and whose values were built into the brand's DNA. She had reminded everyone exactly who she was. But the reckoning wasn't over. The employees still stood in stunned silence. Kevin Torres, the newly promoted store manager, hovered by the counter trying to process what had just happened. Ashley Lynn, now assistant manager, Looked like she'd been hit by a wave of joy and anxiety all at once. Marcus Shaw, composed as ever, watched with the calm posture of someone trained to handle emergencies, though this one had taken an unexpected shape. Alyssa stepped back toward the center of the boutique, the very spot where Susan had tried to humiliate her. Her heels made soft, measured clicks against the marble flooring, echoing through the silence. She turned slowly to face the customers still lingering. Many had stayed, phones lowered now, unsure whether to resume shopping or just keep witnessing. And Alyssa addressed them, her voice warm yet powerful. "To our guests who witnessed this," she said, making eye contact with each person in turn, "I want you to know, this is not what Radiance Atelier stands for." A murmur rippled through the room. "This is not who we are, and this will never be allowed to happen again in any of my stores." From the back, an elderly gentleman in a tan blazer stepped forward. His face was lined with age, his eyes kind but sharp. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady with admiration, "the way you handled that, with grace and control. I've never seen anything like it. You should be proud of what you've built." Alyssa smiled, not politely but genuinely. The first real smile she'd shown all morning. "I am," she said softly, "but I'm only as good as the people who represent my company." She turned back to Kevin and nodded firmly. "Kevin, you've got a lot to take on. Today, you became the face of this location." Kevin straightened his spine. "Yes, ma'am. I won't let you down." Ashley stepped beside him, eyes still misty. "I'll help," she said quietly. "Every step." Alyssa looked at both of them, pride evident in her expression. "Good. Because what we do here, it matters." She looked out across the boutique again. The velvet displays, the custom lighting, the mirrored walls and soft ambient music that had returned to life. Everything in that boutique had been built with purpose down to the stitching in the sales associates' uniforms. This wasn't just a place to sell jewelry. It was a place to make people feel seen, respected, elevated, and Susan had violated that trust. Alyssa walked back to the Monarch collection, the display that had started it all. It still gleamed, pristine under the soft lights. But now, it felt like something more. It felt like a battleground she had just reclaimed. Ashley followed her, then hesitated. "Miss Bennett," she said carefully, "the videos, people are already uploading them." Alyssa nodded. "I know." Ashley looked concerned. "Should we contact legal? Issue a statement?" Alyssa turned toward her and said something that made every customer in the store pause mid-breath. "Let them post." Silence. "Let the world see what happens when someone judges a customer by their appearance," she continued. "Let them see what happens when a person in power uses that power to exclude." She looked directly into one of the still-rolling phones and didn't blink. "Let them see what happens when you try to eject a woman from her own store." Marcus stood at her side, posture strong, tone respectful. "Ma'am," he said, "would you like me to escort Miss Delacroix from the property if she tries to return?" Alyssa glanced at the glass doors and saw that Susan was gone. "No," she said gently. "Let her leave with whatever dignity she has left." It was a choice, a powerful one. Not revenge, not humiliation. Boundaries. Ashley had tears in her eyes again, this time not from pain or pressure, but from watching a leader who led not from ego, but from principle. "I really am sorry," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Alyssa looked at her. "I believe you," she said, "but sorry doesn't erase what was said, or the message it sent to every person watching." Ashley nodded, ashamed. "It doesn't erase the way I felt standing in my own store, being treated like I was invisible." Kevin stepped forward. "Miss Bennett," he said, "what should we do next?" "About the store, the team, today's operations?" Alyssa didn't hesitate. "We stay open," she said. She turned to the remaining customers. "We serve every person who walks in here with the respect and dignity they deserve. And we make sure what happened here today never happens again. Not in this store. Not in any of them." A few customers clapped softly at first, then louder. Not for the drama, but for the truth. Ashley stepped forward, a question in her eyes. "What if the media comes? News trucks? Interviews?" Alyssa looked calm. "I built this business in the age of social media," she said. "I knew from the moment Susan raised her voice that someone was recording." She turned toward the camera again. "Let the world see what happens when justice is served not with rage, but with grace." Then she paused. Her hand went to the bracelet on her wrist. Tarnished. Old. Sentimental. Her grandmother's. This bracelet. she said, lifting her arm so everyone could see, isn't worth much in dollars. But it survived every stage of my life. Poverty, racism, grief, and triumph. She lowered her hand slowly. It reminds me of the truth Susan forgot, that value doesn't come from appearance. It comes from what you carry inside you. The boutique had returned to life now. Kevin helped a customer view an engagement ring. Ashley offered tea to a mother and daughter. Marcus resumed his position near the front. Alyssa walked slowly through the store, nodding at her employees, her customers, the space she'd fought to build. Not just as a business, but as a message. A place where everyone, no matter what they wore, what car they drove, or what color their skin was, felt like they belonged. And on this day, she had reminded everyone, especially Susan, that she belonged everywhere. Because she didn't just walk into that store as a customer. She walked in as the heartbeat of an empire. And when she walked out, she left a legacy stronger than diamonds. The Sarasota flagship store of Radiance Atelier had never been this quiet before, not even during closing hours. But this silence, it wasn't from emptiness. It was from something sacred, something that had just shifted. A reckoning had taken place, a public one. And it wasn't just about a manager losing her job or a CEO asserting her power. No, this was deeper. It was about restoration. It was about taking back space, not just physical, but emotional and moral, and making it whole again. Alyssa Bennett, now fully revealed as the founder and CEO of Radiance Atelier, stood near the Monarch collection, the same display that had sparked the humiliating confrontation just an hour earlier. Now, the diamonds sparkled with new meaning, not as trophies for the elite, but as symbols of something priceless, dignity. All around her, the store was starting to move again, but cautiously, like waking from a dream. Customers murmured in hushed tones. Phones were still up. Videos were still being taken. But now they weren't about scandal. They were about grace. They were about leadership. Kevin Torres, who had just been promoted from assistant manager to manager in real time, stood near the checkout counter, staring at his hands. It was as if he could still feel the gravity of Alyssa's words vibrating through his bones. Ashley Lynn, the 23-year-old sales associate turned assistant manager, was wiping tears from her eyes between customers. She had gone from being silenced by Susan to being publicly uplifted by the woman who ran the company. And Marcus Shaw, the quiet security guard with a soldier's posture, stood watchfully near the door, not as an enforcer, but as a protector of the brand's integrity. Alyssa walked toward Kevin. "Kevin," she said, her tone now softened but not diminished by what had unfolded. "I'll need you to contact HR today. We'll start the paperwork for Susan's termination. And for your promotion." Kevin looked up and nodded, still dazed. "Yes, ma'am." Ashley approached as well, tentative. "What about what comes next?" she asked. "The press. The comments. The attention. People are going to twist this." Alyssa turned to face her, and for a moment, she looked less like a CEO and more like a mentor. "Let them try," Alyssa said calmly. "We don't need to spin the truth. We just need to stand in it." Ashley blinked, then nodded, the words rooting in her like a seed. "Understood." Alyssa turned and glanced at the front of the store. Marcus was standing at parade rest, eyes forward. She walked over. "Marcus." "Yes, ma'am." "You showed judgment. Strength. Calm." He nodded, not out of pride, but out of discipline. "You didn't follow orders. You followed values. That matters." "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. "You've got a raise effective today, and I'll be putting in for a formal commendation on your record." His eyes flickered with a rare glint of emotion. "It's an honor." But Alyssa didn't stop there. She turned to the room, to the remaining customers, and lifted her voice again. "To everyone still here," she said, "thank you for your patience. I know this wasn't what you expected when you walked into a jewelry store today." A few chuckles broke the silence, light and genuine. "But sometimes," she continued, "the most valuable thing in a place like this isn't what's behind the glass. It's what we stand for." An elderly woman stepped forward. She had been quiet the entire time, standing near a set of earrings for over 45 minutes, saying nothing but watching everything. "Miss Bennett," she said, voice steady, "you didn't just teach a lesson. You lived it." Alyssa gave a small nod, the weight of that acknowledgement not lost on her. "I try," she said. "Every day." The woman smiled. "And that's why your company will last longer than any diamond." The compliment hit Alyssa somewhere deep. She blinked once. Just once. Then, turning toward her staff, she clapped her hands once firmly. "All right, everyone," she said. We still have a business to run. That snapped things back into motion. Kevin straightened. Ashley picked up her iPad. Marcus resumed a discreet watch near the back entrance. But Alyssa wasn't done yet. She returned to the Monarch Collection display where it had all begun. She adjusted the necklace, the $350,000 centerpiece, just slightly. Not for show. For balance. Symmetry. Symbolism. Behind her, a young mother with her teenage daughter approached hesitantly. "Ma'am," the mother said, "we were going to leave earlier. But then, we saw you. And my daughter asked if she could stay. She said she'd never seen a black woman command a room like that." Alyssa turned to the girl, who couldn't have been more than 15. "You stayed?" The girl nodded shyly. Alyssa knelt down slightly to meet her gaze. "Then I'm glad I didn't walk out when they told me to." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "You gave her more than jewelry today," she said. "You gave her a future to imagine." Alyssa smiled. "That's the real legacy," she said. She stood up, placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, and said, "Come by our Atlanta store sometime. I'll show you how we design our collections. And maybe you'll design one too." The girl's mouth fell open in awe. Alyssa handed her a business card. "Email me. You already belong." The entire store seemed to exhale at once. The heaviness that had filled the air earlier was now replaced by something softer, lighter. Hope. Radiance Atelier hadn't just survived a PR disaster. It had experienced a transformation, one that every person in that boutique would remember, not because of the diamonds they came to buy, but because of the woman who reminded them that real value lies in character. As things returned to motion, customers being helped, purchases resumed, laughter slowly returning, Alyssa stepped aside. She looked around the space she'd once only dreamed of building. The ceilings high, the marble floors polished to perfection, the lighting perfectly calibrated to make every gemstone shimmer. But none of it mattered more than what she saw in the people now leading it. Kevin, Ashley, Marcus, and a community of customers, witnesses who had just seen the standard reset. Alyssa didn't need applause. She didn't need headlines. She just needed this, clarity. The boutique's crooked display case had been straightened. The wrong manager had been removed. And in the aftermath of that storm, the value she had built Radiance Atelier on, respect, inclusion, and quiet strength, had stood taller than ever. By early afternoon, the Radiance Atelier boutique on Palm Avenue had fully resumed operations. Customers were browsing again. The hum of conversation returned. Champagne glasses clinked quietly. And yet, beneath the surface, something felt different. The space felt honest. Because this store, a place built for elegance, had just gone through something far more powerful than a luxury sale. It had gone through a moment of truth. Alyssa Bennett stood near the entrance now, her gaze sweeping slowly across the boutique she had built with her bare hands, a vision, and a $5,200 Toyota Corolla she still drove to this day. It was never about just selling diamonds. It was about creating a place where people could feel like they mattered. And today, that mission had been tested and reinforced. She took a deep breath, feeling the air shift, cleaner now, lighter somehow. Then she turned back toward the people who had witnessed the transformation and stayed. Customers, staff, even a few strangers who had wandered in during the aftermath and quietly realized they had stepped into more than just a jewelry store. They had stepped into a movement. Alyssa stepped forward. "I want to thank all of you," she said, addressing the customers still in the store. "Not just for your patience, but for your presence. For staying. For seeing. For believing that people deserve to be treated with dignity no matter what they wear, how they look, or what car they pull up in." A round of quiet applause followed. But it wasn't the kind of applause you give after a fashion show or product launch. It was the kind people give when they recognize courage. From the back, Kevin Torres emerged with a clipboard and an entirely new energy in his step. He was still the same man, but you could see it in his posture, in the way his shoulders pulled back and his jaw had set firm. This was a man who had just been called into purpose. "Miss Bennett," he said carefully, "media outlets are already reaching out. We've got at least 5 email inquiries from local stations. One reporter's already outside." Alyssa nodded. "Let them film," she said. "And let them watch how we handle this, not with spin, but with values." Ashley, now officially assistant manager, stepped forward. "We've also had a few calls from customers asking if this location is still safe to shop." She gave a sad smile. "Some of them said they didn't want to get caught in any controversy." Alyssa turned to her, calm and steady. "Tell them this store has never been safer because now it's honest." She looked around again. They're not walking into a perfect boutique. They're walking into a transparent one. Ashley nodded. Marcus, ever alert, approached from the door. Ma'am, there's a woman outside trying to apologize again. Alyssa raised her eyebrows. Susan. Marcus nodded. She's not trying to come in. She just asked that you know she regrets everything. Said she didn't realize the cost until she saw her own reflection in the store window after walking out. Alyssa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, let her go. Marcus nodded once, then returned to his post. Alyssa walked back toward the Monarch collection, the display that had sparked the entire confrontation. She adjusted one of the rings just slightly. Then she looked up. A small group of young customers stood nearby. One of them, a girl in her early 20s, hesitated before speaking. Miss Bennett, do you ever wish you'd yelled back at her? Alyssa smiled gently. Every second I stood there. I wanted to. The girl looked surprised. But then I remembered my response defines me, not her actions. Alyssa turned toward the girl. I didn't build this company so I could lose my composure in a moment of injustice. I built it so I could correct the injustice without losing who I am. She touched the tarnished silver bracelet on her wrist. This survived everything. Poverty, racism, rejection, even silence. And it reminds me real strength is quiet. It doesn't scream. It changes the room. The girl nodded slowly, visibly moved. Nearby, a couple who had been recording earlier stepped forward. We came here for an engagement ring, the man said. But I think we're leaving with something bigger. Alyssa smiled. Still want to see the collection? Absolutely. Kevin stepped in to assist them. His tone was polished, but it came with a new dimension pride. Because now, every sale wasn't just about carrots or clarity. It was about what radiance stood for. Ashley helped another customer pick out a birthday gift. And Marcus? He stood near the front, but this time not as a watcher. He stood like a silent symbol of the integrity this brand now embodied more publicly than ever. And then came a voice from the back. An elderly woman who had been quiet most of the time. Grace, she said, approaching Alyssa. It's rare these days. Alyssa turned. Thank you. The woman smiled. But necessary. That stopped Alyssa in her tracks. She looked around again. Not at the diamonds, but at the people. Her employees, her customers, her legacy. What had just unfolded was more than a viral moment. It was a reaffirmation that in a world of quick judgments, loud reactions, and silent prejudices, there was still a place where grace reigned. And its queen had just reminded everyone why she belonged not just in the boardroom, but in every room she chose to enter. Not through force, not through revenge, but by standing still when the world expected her to walk out. The late afternoon sunlight spilled through the glass front of the Sarasota flagship boutique, casting warm, golden streaks across the marble floor. The store had returned to its natural rhythm, customers chatting softly, jewelry glistening under designer lighting, and the scent of fresh-cut white roses drifting from the reception counter. But beneath that polished calm, something unshakable had taken root. Truth. And in the center of that truth stood Alyssa Bennett, the founder and CEO of Radiance Atelier. Not as a titan on a podium, but as a woman quietly reorganizing a display. Her hands moved gently, adjusting the final ring in the Monarch collection, the very same showcase that had sparked one of the most powerful reckonings the boutique or its employees had ever witnessed. Once the last velvet box was straightened, she stepped back, examining her work. Everything was perfectly aligned now, not just the display, but the entire store's energy, like a record that had finally found its groove. Alyssa turned and walked to the center of the boutique. All eyes followed her, even though she hadn't called for attention. She didn't need to. She simply was the center of gravity now. I want to thank you all again, she said, addressing the staff and remaining customers, for being part of something today that went beyond commerce. Her voice was calm, steady but rich with emotion. What happened here wasn't just about a manager making a mistake. It was about something far more pervasive. About how we decide, often in seconds, who is worthy and who isn't. She looked over at Kevin, Ashley, and Marcus, each of them standing a little taller than when the day began. And how we choose to respond, that is what defines who we are. Alyssa began walking slowly across the boutique, making eye contact as she spoke. I didn't build Radiance Atelier to prove that I belonged in places where people said I didn't. I built it to create places where no one has to prove that ever again. A murmur of agreement passed through the small crowd. She lifted her hand and tapped her wrist lightly. That same silver bracelet. Tarnished. Old. Unremarkable to the untrained eye. This bracelet has been with me since my grandmother gave it to me on the day I turned 18. It's worth less than a dinner out. But to me, it's priceless. She held it up. Because it reminds me, value doesn't come from price tags, or titles, or skin color. It comes from what you carry within you. She paused, looked directly into one of the phones still filming. And if this video makes its way onto your feed, if you're someone watching this later, wondering how to respond when you're treated like you don't belong, here's what I want you to know. Her voice lowered, but the intensity increased. You don't have to raise your voice to raise the standard. The crowd stilled again. You don't have to trade dignity for dominance. Sometimes, the most powerful move is stillness. Calm. Clarity. Alyssa turned to her employees. Kevin, she said, you didn't just earn a promotion today. You earned trust. Because when things got tense, you didn't look away. Kevin nodded. Thank you. I'll live up to it. Ashley. Alyssa continued. You showed courage when it would have been easier to obey. That kind of integrity is rare. And it's going to take you far. Ashley's cheeks turned red, but her eyes held steady. Thank you for seeing me. Alyssa turned to Marcus. You chose to pause. To listen. To follow your judgment over orders. That's the kind of strength I wish more people had. Marcus, ever stoic, gave a quiet, respectful nod. And then Alyssa looked beyond her team, to the customers still watching, still recording. To everyone who was here today, she said, you saw the truth. And I hope what you saw wasn't just justice, but a reminder. A pause. A reminder that no matter who you are, or what people assume about you, you belong. You belong in luxury spaces, in boardrooms, in decisions, in leadership. You belong wherever you choose to be. Silence. Then the elderly gentleman from earlier, the one who had watched the entire scene from a quiet corner, stepped forward once more. I've seen a lot in my life, he said, but I've never seen someone take power and wear it with that much grace. You didn't just win the moment. You taught a generation. Alyssa looked him in the eyes and gave a nod of deep respect. Thank you, she said quietly. Then she turned back to her team one last time. Now, she said, smiling faintly, we've got work to do. Everyone moved into motion. Kevin resumed helping customers. Ashley adjusted the front counter. Marcus returned to the front door this time, standing like a sentinel of values, not just security. The boutique pulsed with a new kind of energy. And Alyssa? She walked to the back of the boutique, picked up a small polishing cloth, and began cleaning the surface of a nearby glass display. Not for show, not for the cameras, but because this was her store. And when something was off, even just slightly, she made it right. One adjustment at a time. Just before she stepped into her office, a teenage girl, perhaps 17, ran up to her, phone in hand. Miss Bennett, she said breathlessly. I watched the whole thing. Can I ask, how do you stay so calm when people treat you like you don't belong? Alyssa paused, turned slowly. Because I know the truth, she said, her voice like a stone over still water. I know who I am. She smiled gently. And when you know who you are, they can't take that from you no matter how loud they get. The girl blinked, overwhelmed. Then Alyssa leaned forward, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said the words that would live in the girl's memory forever. Walk into every room like you own it, even if they try to push you out. And one day, when they realize you really do, don't gloat. Just straighten the crooked things and keep going. And with that, Alyssa walked away. Back to her office. Back to her work. Back to the empire she had built from nothing but faith, grit, and a silver bracelet that never lost its shine even when the world tried to tarnish it. Because in the end, the most powerful response to prejudice isn't revenge. It's grace lived at full volume. In a world quick to judge by appearances, what happened in that store is a reminder that real power doesn't shout, it stands. It listens, and it chooses grace when anger would be easier. Alyssa Bennett didn't win the day because she was rich. She won it because she knew who she was and refused to let someone else define her worth. That's the real takeaway. When you know your value, no one can take it from you. You don't need to prove it through yelling, or violence, or pride. You prove it by how you respond, how you lead, and how you rise after someone tries to drag you down. So the next time you're treated like you don't belong, whether it's in a store, a classroom, or a boardroom, remember this. Your silence can be strategic. Your composure can be revolutionary. And your dignity? That's your legacy. If this story moved you, don't just scroll past it. Drop the word grace in the comments if you believe leadership begins with character. Tell us, have you ever been judged before someone knew your story? And hit subscribe to join a growing community of people who know that justice isn't just about what's loudest, but about what's right. This channel shares true stories that shift perspectives, elevate voices, and remind us that how we treat others always matters. Because silence can carry injustice, but it can also carry truth. Choose wisely.